For the U.S. men's national team, the 2003 age group is quite possibly the most talented age group that this team has ever produced. So let's take a look at how this U-20 team could look and who has a shot at breaking into this team in this cycle. So basically what we're going to be doing today is going through the full U-20 pool, who's going to be competing for spots to make that Concacaf qualifying team and ultimately the World Cup. To help me out, I'm bringing in Gideon. Make sure you follow him on Twitter and also follow The First Touch. You can talk to us in Spaces. We'll probably be talking about this a lot over the coming months. So Gideon, welcome to the channel.
Thank you for having me.
So basically the way we're going to be going through this is we're going to be dividing each position into 4 tiers. So tier 1 is they are a lock starter on this team. If they're healthy, they're going to be starting. Tier 2 is they are competing to be starting. If there's an opening there, maybe there are multiple guys competing for that spot, but they're probably a lock in a roster. Tier 3 is guys who are competing for those final spots on the roster, not necessarily competing to start, but competing to even be on the team. And then tier 4 is guys who are maybe a bit of a long shot, maybe on the outside looking in right now, and a couple 05s who are maybe for next cycle, but may get involved at some point during this cycle. So Gideon, we'll start with the goalkeepers, and this is one of the strongest positions for this team, and one of the strongest positions all the way down the pipeline. The number 1 is Gaga Slonina from the Chicago Fire. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
No debate. Gaga's number 1 as of right now, unless something happens. I mean, arguably he's already national team ready for that third keeper spot. So there's no debate in him being tier 1.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much to say about Gaga that you don't already know, because he's already a starting goalkeeper in MLS at just 17 years old. And I don't think there's really anyone who can compete to replace him right now. So there's no one in tier 2. We'll go down to the tier 3 guys. I have 3, and we'll talk about them a little bit. Guys who are competing to be the second and third goalkeepers on this roster. We'll start with Chris Brady from the Chicago Fire, who's right now the Chicago Fire's number 3 goalkeeper. He's going to be starting in MLS Next Pro next year. He's the same age as Gaga, so he's still pretty quickly accelerating for a goalkeeper. What do you think about Brady?
I think Brady's a fantastic shot stopper. He's in a really difficult spot being behind Slonina. If Slonina wasn't at the club, his situation could be completely different than it is right now. He's not my pick to necessarily back up Slonina as of right now for the youth national team, but he's obviously a solid choice and has a lot of talent and could very well be there in the summer and then of course next year.
And then we'll run through some of the other guys, Alex Borto and Jeff Dusnup from Fulham and Real Salt Lake respectively, who are another 2 guys who are competing for that spot. Borto was in the Revelations Cup, played 1 game in that. Jeff Dusnup, I don't think he's really been involved too much this cycle yet, but is a very talented goalkeeper. Who do you think is going to get those second and third spots in this cycle?
So personally, if I had to select, if I was selecting, I would go with Borto and Dusnup as of right now. I think Brady is going to be held back potentially from where he's going to be competing in MLS Next Pro. I mean, you could make the same arguments with Dusnup, but I think that second spot is pretty locked for Alex as of currently. That third is a little bit more contested. Maybe even get someone like Antonio Carrera or Emi Ochoa. We just have to see.
Yeah, you mentioned Carrera and Ochoa, who are the 2 tier 4 guys I have. And for me, I don't think either of them really right now are going to be able to compete with the top 4. But Carrera did start for the U-20s in that January camp in the absence of the other 4. So we'll have to see what happens with him. And Emi Ochoa is also on the younger side too. We'll see what happens with him. He's currently with Mexico. But with that, we'll move right on to the left backs, because there is another lock-in starter here, but with an asterisk. So Jonathan Gomez, Real Sociedad, just made his debut there. He's been tremendous for Louisville last season and in his debut for Sociedad B. But he's been with Mexico in the past. Where do we think he's going to fall this March and, of course, in Concacaf in June?
So we've been hearing a lot of stuff regarding Jonathan Gomez for the past few months. There's no true way to tell which national team he's going to select for youth tournaments in particular. I would say that he's more comfortable with U.S. youth camps, but there's no certain way to be certain about that. So it's just a sort of wait and see. When March comes around, I think we'll have a more concrete answer. about where he'll lie.
There were a couple of guys who were competing to back him up and potentially even take a starting spot if he does end up going with Mexico. Caleb Wiley from Atlanta United and Jacob Green from DC United are the two that stand out. They were both in the Revelations Cup. What do we think about these guys? I think for me, this is a position of weakness beyond Gomez if we're talking about natural left backs. So who do we think can ultimately take that backup spot, or maybe even competing to start if Jogo does end up playing with Mexico this cycle?
If I had to pick anyone in particular, I think it would be Caleb Wiley. He's with the apps with George Bello leaving to Germany. I think he's going to get a lot of minutes this year at Atlanta. I think there's a real chance to break out. Um, Caleb is much more defensive than our other left backs, so that's I'd say a breath of fresh air almost. So he's a sort of a different player, but he's one to look out for. He is younger. He is 04, so he is a year younger than everybody else.
Then before we move on to the center backs, two other guys I wanted to mention, Anton Sorensen from Philadelphia and Noah Allen from Miami, but I don't think either of those guys, unless there are injuries, will really have much of a shot to break in, other than maybe Sorensen. But for the center backs, again, we have one lock-in starter here. Of course, there are two center backs. And the right center back, when he's available, because he is in Germany, and so he's not guaranteed to be released for every camp, but Justin Che from Hoffenheim. He's probably the best defender here. There's no doubt about it. He'll be the starter, and everyone who's watching this knows what they need to know about Justin Che. And he probably won't be playing right back if the first choice right back is here and he's fit. So to back up Justin Che, for me, I actually have two tier 2 guys. These are the two guys who can play left center back, who can play on the left side of that center back pairing and can compete to start. Antonio Leone from LAFC, who is an asterisk because he is currently with Mexico, and Kobe Henry, who is an 04, who was actually in the last December camp for the U.S. men's national team. Though he didn't play, he was in the camp, which is something not a lot of people expected. He's currently at Orange County. So between these guys, starting with these two, who do you think will take that starting spot, assuming they're both there?
So, assuming they're both there, I think it's pretty clear as of right now. Antonio Leone is a superior center back to Kobe Henry so far in their careers. Leone offers a lot of. Not only does Leone offer on-pitch ability, he offers a lot of leadership among his peers. He's already the captain for Mexico, but I wouldn't rule that against him choosing USA for under 20 events. I think still very possible. We're just going to have to see. Kobe Henry is very capable, though. He's going to be starting the season out with USL, and then it's presumed that he'll transfer over to France in the summer. So exciting stuff out of that center back group.
I mean, I think especially if Leone can grow into his bigger frame, he'll absolutely be a really good player for the U.S., assuming he picks the U.S. But again, Mexico did make him the captain in some previous camps, so you never know. There are a couple of guys in tier 3. I know you're a big fan of one or two of them, so I'll run through those three. Jalen Neal and Casey Walls, who are both in the Revelations Cup, and Brandon Craig from the Philadelphia Union, who can also play as a 6, but we'll put him in here as a center back. These three guys, I think you're starting to see there's a big drop off after the first 3 here, at least in terms of current ability. So who do you think is going to be taking those final spots at center back to be the backup?
So I don't really see Casey Walls as any sort of consolation to make the team. I don't think he's in the talk. I think Jalen Neal and Brandon Craig both have strong cases. Brandon Craig was a standout at the last under 20 camp and is now performing well in preseason for Philly. And I think he will get probably around 500 to 600 total minutes this upcoming MLS season at the max. I think he is probably a year away from truly breaking out and potentially being a starter for the youth national team or Philly Union, but he's one to keep an eye on, especially with his positional versatility. Jalen Neal, someone we've talked to and someone we're watching closely. I think he will also be sort of in the same boat as Craig when it comes to minutes this season. He's a good ball playing center back. He has a slight frame, which he'll probably need to bulk up a bit to really be competing at a higher level. But other than that, he's extremely talented.
So there's a couple other guys, just again, tier 4, honorable mentions effectively. Efrain Morales from Atlanta United. He's been involved with Puerto Rico. I don't think he's really at the level to be involved with this cycle. The same goes for Marcus Fernakis from the LA Galaxy. He's a bit behind the other guys. There's one who's a bit of a mystery. We don't really know how good he is, how much of a role he will actually be able to play, but he's an 05. Grayson Tony from Bayern Munich. How much do we really know about him? Do we really know anything at all that's meaningful?
Personally, I know nothing. I've heard from scouts he's fantastic, but you have to take everything with a grain of salt, especially if you can't see him with your own eyes. So until we know more and until he even gets a U-20 call up, I don't think it's really fair to even worry about him.
Perfect. All right. Now for the right backs, this is another pretty thin position. And the starter, there is a lock-in starter because Mauricio Cuevas, who is finally getting to play soccer again after going over a year without playing a single professional game. But he's at Club Bruges now, and he's in their academy. But he was in the last US U-20 camp and apparently was pretty good.
You say it's a weaker position. I would say it's actually over the past few months gotten a lot stronger. Of course, Mauricio Cuevas is a brilliant player, and he probably could be our free kick taker when he's back with the team. Amazing on offense. There's some questions defensively with him, but I think he's talented. I do think he's probably the starter, but I don't necessarily know if he is a lock starter with the emergence of a few other names.
Interesting. So you mentioned some other names. I assume you're referring to Caden Pierre, who from Sporting Kansas City, who got a little bit of a look. Devin Tanton from Fulham, and then Michael Halliday from Orlando, who was injured in November, so we missed that camp. But he got some looks with Orlando last season. I haven't seen a whole lot of him, but I'm curious to see if he can break into Orlando's team this year.
I think they're all solid. My personal favorite out of the bunch is Devin Tanton right now with Fulham, already breaking onto the scenes with their under 23s, which is a big accomplishment for an 04 to be doing, especially in a defensive position. Whether or not he gets first team minutes soon, yet to be seen, but he's been pretty good with their under 23 team. Caden Pierre is one who also caught my eye during the Revelations Cup. I was impressed with him in the limited minutes that he got, and I can't wait to see what he does with SKC this year.
Moving on to the sixes, this is a big question mark because going into the cycle, the favorite seemed to be Daniel Leyva. He was the captain of this team in their first game in November, first game of the cycle, but he didn't really step up. He didn't take his opportunity. Someone who did take his opportunity is Daniel Edelman. So these two guys are probably the two best natural sixes competing for that spot. What do you think about both these guys? I think we're on the same page here that Daniel Edelman is probably ahead of Leyva right now.
I think with both of them, they both leave something to be desired on opposite ends of their games, right? So I would argue that while Edelman is there physically and can cover a lot of ground, technically he's not amazing. And then when you look at Leyva, who's great technically, he's not there physically. He's slow and can't cover ground. And it just leaves when either are on the pitch, it leaves something to be desired, and I think it stops us up both on offense and defense.
Three other guys worthy of mention. The first one is Javi Casas from the Chicago Fire, who was in the last U-20 camp. Wasn't necessarily his best camp. He hasn't really broken into the Chicago Fire, so he's not really necessarily someone who is in that competition to start. The two other guys I wanted to mention were Jeremy Garay, who actually is capped by El Salvador's senior team, but is currently with the US U-20s. I'm not too sure about him because he wasn't too good in that Revelations Cup. And then the 05 I wanted to mention is Brooklyn Raines from Houston Dynamo. He does have some issues with the MLS rules. He can't play right away for Houston, which is just such a dumb rule. Is he necessarily going to be a six? We don't really know yet. Out of those three guys I mentioned, Casas, Raines, and Garay, do you think any of them really have a shot of breaking into this team?
I don't think they have. Even with the weakened position, I don't think they really have a true shot. It's yet to be seen. Of course, stuff can happen, but I don't think really any of them are on that level yet.
Now we're going to move on to the most competitive position on this team, because all the way down from the 03s, all the way down the pipeline, this position is just loaded from top to bottom. And we're talking about the attacking midfielders, whether it's a dual 8, whether it's an 8 and a 10. Varas has played both in the past, so we don't know exactly how this team is going to line up tactically. But there's a lot of names to talk about here. We'll start with Caden Clark, because for me, he's the lock starter. and possibly even a captain of this team. We don't really know yet. He's had a complicated club situation. He went to Leipzig, but never actually went, came back on loan to the Red Bulls. Do you think Caden Clark is a starter? Absolutely, no doubt.
I mean, there's not much doubt. I don't think really you could argue it any other way. There's no true competition for that spot when you're comparing them to Caden Clark. What he can do on the ball, what he can do off the ball, his scoring touch, his passing, it's pretty unmatched in that position, bar one player, but I don't even know if he'll be playing the 8 in this upcoming cycle. So we'll just have to see. So yeah, Caden Clark would be a lock starter in my opinion.
So competing to start next to him, there are a couple, actually a lot of guys. So we'll just go one by one. We'll start with Paxton Aronson, who is, along with Caden Clark, one of the most talented players for that kind of a role. And he's set for a breakout year in Philadelphia. This is, mark it down. He's going to have an incredible season this year if he stays fit. Do you think he's the guy to be next to Clark?
That's the guy I was.
Do you think we'll see him on the wing as well? Because he has played there for Philadelphia.
That's the guy I was mentioning just a second ago. I think Paxton is the only other midfielder or winger that's necessarily on the same level as Caden Clark as of right now. Talking about just his ability and potential that's not named like Kevin Paredes or whatever, or Jonathan Gomez or Justin Shea, who are different altogether. But in that midfield, I think Paxton Aronson's the only one that's close. And I think we could see him on the wing. He has that versatility. It would just depend on what sort of shape the coach wants to go with. So yet to be seen.
It should be worth mentioning with regards to midfielders playing on the wing. Caden Clark did play on the wing a little bit in the past U-20 camp in January, so that's another position we could potentially see Caden Clark in. But having versatility is really nice. Jack McGlynn and Moses Nyman are probably the third and fourth guys competing for that spot. Yeah, I mean, Jack McGlynn got some really good opportunities toward the end of the Philadelphia Union season last year. Started a couple games for this USU 20 team. Moses Nyman was injured in November. He can play as a 6 or as an 8. He's been playing quite a bit as a 6 for DC United. So these two guys, I really like McGlynn as someone who could potentially start if one of those 10s is on the wing, because he's more of a natural 8.
Yeah, I'd argue that McGlynn is more of a natural 8. McGlynn reminds me a lot of a left-footed Busio, just how he plays and his play style. He's definitely a distributor, a central point in the offense that's going to be laying balls out to everyone. I think he'd be a great balancing point. I think with Moses Nyman, you get almost mini N'Golo Kante-esque type player, someone who's going to be all over the pitch, running around, trying to win balls, just trying to create havoc. There are some concerns with his size, so it's yet to be seen. But he's obviously extremely talented.
And yeah, I mean, for me, we'll come back to this when we discuss what we'd like to see as our best possible lineup for this team. But for me, I'd like to see Moses Nyman as the 6 on this team, though he doesn't necessarily have the size and strength to like a Daniel Edelman. I think he just makes up for it with the way that he can cover ground and just kind of be a ball-winning midfielder. The next tier of guys, there's a couple guys, and then one we really wanted to talk about. We talked about him a little bit before we started recording, but we'll come back to him. We'll start with Quinn Sullivan and Brian Gutierrez from the Philadelphia Union and Chicago Fire, respectively. Both were not that bad in November. That was a pretty bad camp overall, but Guti had some good moments off the bench, and both of these two are poised to play a role for their MLS teams next season. What do we think about these guys, and how much of a shot do both of them have at breaking into this team? Though I don't think either of them will necessarily be starters.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily they'll be starters, but I do think they have a shot. I'd say if one of them goes, the other won't. That's sort of the situation they're in right now. They're helped by the fact that they are positionally versatile. They both play wing, 10, 8, whatever. Just depends on what you need, really. I think out of the two, Sullivan definitely has a bigger shot. And I think while Gutierrez will play a bigger role with his MLS team, Sullivan is going to have more impactful minutes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what Guti can do this season, because this is going to be the first season where he's actually going to be asked to play a meaningful role for the Fire, just because of the lack of depth in the winger and 10 positions for that team. So he'll probably end up being the backup to Jordan Shaqiri. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do with that added opportunity to have a bigger role for the Fire. Quinn Sullivan had some good moments for the Union last season. He scored an incredible bicycle kick. He's also scored for the U-20s in that January camp in their 1-0 win over, I believe it was FC Dallas. So he's definitely someone to watch and someone who Mikey Varas definitely rates. Another guy I wanted to mention very quickly before we talk about a potential prodigy, Zach Booth from Leicester. He was out for a long time. He's back. Probably on the outside, looking in right now. But as you just mentioned, he did just score on his return to Leicester City's youth teams. So there's not a whole lot to say about him at the moment, but definitely someone to keep an eye on. Rokas Pukstas from Split in Croatia has made the bench for the first team a couple times, hasn't debuted yet. He was in the November camp for the under-20s, didn't necessarily stand out. So I think he's on the outside looking in right now. But now the one we really want to talk about, Obed Vargas, born in 2005 from Anchorage, Alaska, Mexican-American, was a big surprise that he was included in the U-20 camp in January. Like nobody expected him to even be involved remotely in this camp. Took that opportunity because he was a standout in that camp. Not only a standout, he started for the team, goes back to Seattle's preseason, starts a couple games in preseason, and at the time we're recording this, things could change by the time you're watching this. He is slated to start for the Seattle Sounders against Montagua in the Concacaf Champions League. Obed Vargas, what do we think about him?
I mean, he's an anomaly, right? Like, there's not much to, like, you don't have much to add. Like, yeah, he started last year a game at the age of 15 for Seattle, but they were like an injury COVID.
That was in a COVID crisis.
Yeah, it seems like he's grown. He looks physically there. From what we're hearing, he's a technical beast. Is he going to play the 8? Is he going to play the 10? Is he going to play the wing? Yet to be seen. How big of a role is he going to have out in Seattle this upcoming season? Who knows? It's anyone's fair guess, I think, right now. That's sort of where we can stand on him. Until I see actual game footage of him as he is right now, I don't think I could make an honest claim. But
the reviews that we've been hearing have been absolutely raving. So yeah, we'll just have to see with him, because we didn't really expect too many 05s to be involved in this cycle. Usually there ends up being 1, 2, maybe 3 playing a cycle up. Like last cycle, it was Uli Yanez, Conrad de la Fuente. But right here, we're looking at a guy who, in the most stacked position on this team, has a real shot at making this team and potentially competing to start at some point. So maybe come the World Cup, we'll see. So we'll just have to see. We'll have to keep a very close eye on him for Seattle this season. Keep an eye on him in Concacaf Champions League. But it seems like he's going to have a big role for Seattle this season, bigger than most of the guys who we're talking about today. 2 other guys who we really want to talk about from the 05 core. Originally, these 3 were kind of seen in the same contingent. 05s who may be a long shot of making the team. Reed Baker Whiting, he was seen as Seattle's top prospect. Vargas appears to have potentially passed him up. And then Sergio Arejo, who I also want to specifically mention, Mexican-American from the Chicago Fire. The Chicago Fire really, really values him to go to the very, very top. And he wasn't involved in January for the US U-20s, but he's been one of the standouts for Chicago Fire in preseason. Maybe not ready to start in MLS yet, but definitely someone I would keep an eye on. And then, do you have anything to say about Reed or Sergio?
Yeah, I think they're just keep an eye. I don't know if they'll be ready yet, especially in how stacked the position is as of right now. But they are interesting for this upcoming MLS season. I do think both will be getting at least a few minutes. And I think Reed Baker Whiting potentially could be getting a good chunk of minutes. We'll just have to see.
Esmir Bayraktovic, Alex Alvarado, and Evan Rotundo. Those are 3 guys who are really long shots at this moment in time. Alex Alvarado, maybe less so. He's kind of a curious situation because he is actually getting a couple minutes in a top 6 league in Portugal, which is weird. But Esmir is an 05. He was in the last U-20 camp, wasn't necessarily a standout. And Evan Rotundo over at Schalke playing for their youth teams is a real long shot at this point. Anything to say about these three, or do we move on to the wingers?
A quick note on Evan. I know a lot of people will probably recognize that name and be very confused about why he's a long shot. He's just sort of stagnated. It feels like, at least physically. It's technically he's there. It's just physically he isn't. So that's what I'll have to say about him. Someone else I wanted to mention was Bora Adenlik. He's an 8/10, potentially someone who could play the 9. He plays for Fenerbahce under 19s, but he's starting to get first team training and potentially could break through. Currently, he's with Turkey's youth teams, but from what we've gathered, he's pretty open to playing with the U.S. as well. He's an interesting name. I don't know if he's necessarily for this cycle, but again, sort of an unknown who could be extremely talented and has the potential to break through.
On to the wingers, and there's, for me, one lock starter, and that's Kevin Paredes, who just moved to Wolfsburg in the Bundesliga, yet to debut at the time of recording, but is one of the US's most talented prospects, especially in the winger pool. He's just an incredible player. He can play on the wing, either wing actually. He can play the wing back, even as a left back, even trained a little bit as an 8 for the US in December camp. Kevin Paredes, lock starter?
Of course, there's no doubt he can dribble past anybody, it seems like, at that level at least. His positional versatility is unmatched in this team. I think he definitely can play the most positions out of anybody, if asked to. I don't think there is really any other winger as of yet that's on his level, unless Paxton or Caden Clark are playing that wing position, but that's yet to be seen.
Dante Sealy had a really hot start at PSV after joining on loan from FC Dallas. For young PSV, I might add. But he really burst onto the scene in the fall, maybe dropped off a little bit since then, was not that amazing in the Revelations Cup, had some good moments. But I think he's probably, behind Paredes, probably the best winger here.
I would say that Dante Sealy on talent alone is the best winger here. It's just he's one of the most, if not the most inconsistent player we've had on the youth national team in a long time. When he's hot, he's great. When he's cold, he is very bad.
Yeah, and then Cade Cowell. And I know a lot of people watching this are going to be surprised that we have him so low, because he's someone who's been getting a lot of attention. He went on trial at Barcelona. He's been linked with transfer moves all the time, just signed a huge under 22 initiative contract, 4-year deal in San Jose, earning a lot of money on that. Cade Cowell, I don't think he technically has enough to really contribute for this team as a winger. Do you agree with that?
I think Cowell's probably going to be in contention with the 9 spot up top. He could float back and forth for this team. I think backup winger, backup 9, that's sort of where he'll be. And that might be a bit surprising for some people to hear because of what he's doing in MLS. I just don't necessarily see his technical ability on par with some of the other options.
But yeah, we'll see what happens, because this is going to be his second full season as a professional in San Jose, where he's going to be in the first team. So we'll see if he can make the starting job his own. They're paying him a lot of money. And yeah, we'll see where he fits into this team. But he's probably someone who's a roster lock, even if we don't necessarily rate him as highly as some people do. Diego Luna was one of the better players in November. He scored a goal against Mexico. He's also Mexican-American. He's playing for El Paso, but he went on trial a bunch of places in Europe, most notably Anderlecht, some places in Portugal. And yeah, what do you think about Luna?
I think Luna's talented. I think he can offer something from the backup, put him in the 60th to 70th minute, and I think he can cause some havoc. When you look at some of the 8s who can also play that wing position, I don't know if Luna has a place in the team potentially. He'll have to battle it out. But he is an extremely talented player. I think there's questions to be said about the level that he's consistently playing at compared to some of the other players. But he has so far proven that he's on the same page and on the same level.
Worth mentioning, Luna is maybe even more naturally a 10, but just with the 10s that are in this pool, there's no way he's going to break into this team as a 10. He'll have to do it as a winger. But yeah, a couple other guys just want to throw out there. These are absolutely long shots for this team. Fede Oliva from Atletico Madrid hasn't really been setting the world alight in their youth teams, though he does have a lot of promise. and he is being pursued by Argentina, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Alex Monis from the Chicago Fire was involved in the last cycle before it was cut short. He hasn't been involved this cycle yet. He's not been too amazing for the Chicago Fire in preseason, but we'll see what happens with him. And then I'm just going to throw 5 guys pretty much just out there. Chris Fletcher was in the last U-20 camp. He's an interesting character. He plays for Bethesda. Supposedly is going to be joining Dortmund, but not until he turns 18. But he's an 05. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen there, where he's going to be playing, because he's not going to be playing with DC United. Leo Torres from San Antonio, bit of a long shot, I think, too. Serge Ngoma, I believe that's how it's going to be pronounced. From the Red Bulls, he just signed. I was about to say, it's just signed with the Red Bulls, pro contract. Dantuma Torre was in the past seen as a much higher level prospect, probably on the outside looking in right now from the Rapids. And Felipe Valencia, I think he's an 05 from Inter Miami. I don't really see him getting into this team, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah, there's not much to be said. I think Chris Fletcher is the most interesting. From what we hear, he performed okay, a bit rusty because he's out of season currently. He's a tall, pacey winger who has a lot of technical ability. It seems, again, like Obed Vargas, we don't know too much about him, but it does say something that he trialed at Manchester United, Bayern Munich, and Dortmund, and apparently got contract offers from all 3 of them. So he's an interesting player to keep an eye on. To say where his level truly is, I don't necessarily know. But it appears as if he's physically there with some of the older players when you look at pictures and videos and stuff.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see with him and with a lot of those other guys as well. On to the strikers. This is a remarkably thin position. I should start by mentioning that in November, even Caden Clark started as a false 9. We mentioned before Cade Cowell as someone who could play the 9. Diego Luna, in theory, could maybe even play it too. So there's a lot of guys who could play the 9 in absence of who would be the lock starter right behind me, Ricardo Pepi. He's with the senior national team. Maybe a long shot chance we see him for Olympic qualifying in June, but I think it's really unlikely. But a name a lot of people will know, Malik Sanogo. What do we think about Malik Sanogo from Union Berlin, who lit up, I believe it was the U17 Bundesliga, took the step up to the U19 Bundesliga, and didn't even come close to matching his production at the U17 level, and wasn't necessarily the best at the Revelations Cup. He's kind of one of those guys who, with his pace and just ability to beat defenders, can really dominate at a lower level. But when he takes a step up to a higher level, I think it takes some time to transition. What do we think about Sanogo?
He's sort of a mystery as of right now. I wouldn't say that he faltered necessarily when he went up a level. I mean, he's currently with the first team training a bunch, and there is a plan in place to. I think he will get some minutes in the first team this second half of the Bundesliga season. I would say that there's definitely some problems with his technique, especially his hold-up play, but it's yet to be seen. I think he's a serviceable number 9 as of right now for the youth national team, and I think he can take a jump. We'll just have to wait.
Beyond Malik, we kind of have a desert of strikers in the 03 and 04 age groups. Not a whole lot of natural number 9s. I'll start by mentioning Misael Rodriguez from the Chicago Fire, another Chicago Fire player. Really good youth class for the Fire at the moment, but he got injured in November camp. He got called in, didn't play. He's been even playing on the wing sometimes in preseason. I don't really think he's up to level at the moment after lighting up MLS Next. Christian Torres is with Mexico right now. I think he's also way off the level of the other striker options, but he's another guy. You really never know with him. Patrick Weah, I believe he tore his ACL. He's out for the full season. He was already a bit of a stretch, but he did tear his ACL, so he's out for all of 2022. Of course, from Minnesota United. Anything to say about any of the strikers that I mentioned, or any other potentially wild card options, or is this really just a desert of strikers?
I think this age group is definitely a desert of strikers for sure. Maybe you see a Darren Yappy who trialed with Arsenal But other than that, I don't really see any potential strikers even for that backup spot. I think most likely you'll see Cal, and then a rotation of false nines at that position with how barren it is.
And honestly, I know this is focused on the U-20 cycle, but there's a desert of strikers all the way down the pipeline for the next couple age groups. So with no one really seizing that number 9 position for the US men's national team, like it's not like there's someone coming up in a couple years who is going to make that position his own necessarily, unless Ricardo Pepi can get back to his trajectory. Like that's a position of concern for honestly the next decade for the US men's national team.
Yeah, I would argue that we don't really see a true number 9 prospect again until potentially the 05s, if the kid at Roma chooses the USA. And then I think the 07s are absolutely deep and loaded with that. But again, when you're talking about the 07s, that's a bunch of 14-year-olds. So not ready to make that.
We're talking about guys at that point who aren't going to be getting any MLS minutes for several years for the most part.
Yeah, there's only
the only one potentially
maybe
is Axel Kai, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with him. And at this point, we're talking about guys who probably won't be involved at this U-20 level for the next 2 cycles. So yeah, let's go through what our lineups are. I will flash them up on screen. I'm going to start with mine. For me, the goalkeeper is Gaga Slonina, the left back, Jonathan Gomez, left center back, Leone, if he's there, if he's with Mexico, Kobe Henry, the right center back, Justin Shea, and then the right back, Mauricio Cuevas. Defensive midfield, as I said before, I like Moses Nyman for that position, even though he's not a natural 6. For me, I like my 8s as being Caden Clark and Jack McGlynn. Caden Clark is the more advanced of the 2, I guess, as the 10. McGlynn more as the 8. The wingers, Paxton Aronson on the right and Kevin Paredes on the left. And with Ricardo Pepi not being involved in this cycle, most likely, I have Cade Cowell as my number 9.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. For me, I'll go Gaga, of course, in goal. I've debated whether or not a back 4 or a back 3 is what's more viable. I'd say a back 4 just due to depth in our center back position as of right now. So I'll go Jogo. If Jogo's not there, I think it's either going to be Paredes or Caleb Wiley. 2 center backs are Leone and Justin Shea. If Leone's not there, of course, Kobe Henry. Mauricio Cuevas is my starter as of right now, but I'm very open to seeing that change. I think there's a lot of competition for that spot. My 6 personally is going to be Danny Edelman. I'm not too certain where Moses Nyman, how he's going to translate to the 6 as of right now. I think he could win it, but we'll just have to wait and see. I'll go a double 10 pressing 10/8 system of Paxton and Clark. I think they both make up for each other, and like their defense is solid enough to be able to play that. My wingers are going to be Paredes and Sealy, and my 9 is going to be Malik Sanogo.
So when we add all those positions together, this right here is collectively our full depth chart. So if you want to pause and take a closer look at it, feel free to do that. But yeah, this is pretty much the U-20 pool for this upcoming cycle.
So with that, thank you for joining the show, Gideon. Everyone who's watching, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow both of us on Twitter. We're going to be doing some more of these videos throughout the cycle, talking about the U-20s and their road to the U-20 World Cup. So make sure you subscribe and follow both of us for more updates. But with that, we'll see you guys later.